IVM.
Welcome to Getting Meta. About today's guest, when I had the idea for this show a long time back, the guy who I'm going to be speaking to today, easily among the first names to come to mind, Krish Ashok, or Ashok as he's called. Few people to me exemplify the word polymath better than Ashok does. By day, he leads a major team at Tata Consultancy Services, TCS, which by itself sounds pretty demanding. But what's astonishing is that outside of work, he manages to balance a very rich set of hobbies and side projects while also having a family. And all of these projects are pretty like high quality. None of them are like compromised or anything like that. Ashok is considered a legend by several people, thanks to his many memes, his tumblers, music projects, his humor writing, his non-humor writing. Especially during the golden age of Indian Twitter, which I guess was like around 2008 to 2013 or so. Once even gave a TEDx talk about hobbies, inculcating them, how they're an important part of his life and stuff like that. Now, the interesting thing about several of these projects is how they bring intersections together, right? Like heavy metal and Sanskrit, for example, or Rage comics and Tambrahm culture, and that led to a Tumblr called Tambrahm Rage, still hilarious. Or indeed his recent book called Masala Lab, which blends science and Indian cooking, a fascinating concept. So Ashok's always done very well with these intersections, and that has acted as an inspiration to me many times. And he's been an inspiration to me in many other ways as well. And he's opened up my once young closed mind a couple of times. Something which I reference on the during this episode. It was an absolute pleasure to speak to him. We spoke about productivity, hobbies, reminisced a little bit about the good old days on Twitter, which I mentioned above, and so much more. We recorded this episode on 31st December 2020. Yes, I know it's been a long time coming, but I'm thrilled to finally release it to the world. So without further ado, getting meta with Krish Ashok. Ashok, thank you so much for appearing on this show. When the idea for this productivity show all came up, yours was one of the first names that really just popped up to mind. And the challenge for me really was from which angle to approach this from, because there's so much to talk to you about. So thank you so much for being one of the first few guests on this very untested show format. No idea what it's going to be like, but thank you anyway for coming on.
Absolute pleasure.
One of the reasons I wanted to chat with you was, there's so many projects that you have, your evangelizing of hobbies over the years and things like that. And while we can definitely jump into that, a reason I personally was very keen on talking with you was, I think you were a very important part of the Twitter journey that we were all collectively part of here in India. I think we reminisce the good old days, as we say, 2009 to 2013, 12, 13 or so, when we had so many jokes and memes and things like that. And I think people like you, Anand, Ramesh Srivas, I mean, it definitely does sound like I'm talking like an old uncle talking about the good old days. As it were, yeah. But I think personally, I think a lot of that is those interactions with you guys. I mean, we were all like just joking around. Really, I think a lot of that, just shaped a lot of where I ended up. But when I was searching for, okay, what are the there were so many projects to pick from. I realized that an interesting place to find some interesting starting point to start this conversation was really to just look at mail exchanges that you and I have had over the years. It's quite interesting, but you and I have actually done some things together. I don't know if you remember, we used to do this series for Cricinfo back in the day. By any chance, if you remember, that when we used to make those parody songs and things. And I think Summer of '83 and things like that we used to do. But here's another one, which it's not a project, but I came across and I was laughing for a minute straight when, it just brought back a flood of memories. And I hope it does the same for you. I wanted to fill in the blanks and see what comes after this. I thank you for the article, but your visualizers, artists, graphic designers, and art editors, oops, they forgot a basic thing. Can you fill in the blanks that come after this, Ashok?
No, can't seem to remember.
Sorry?
Can't seem to remember.
Okay, I'll give you another one. The drawing gives a full-fledged impression that dash are biting into currency note, or for that matter, paper. and please do not relate ants to
Oh, yes, of course.
the vermin.
Yes.
You wanted to
Vermin,
walk us
yes,
through.
yes.
You want to tell us through what that was about? Because I think this encapsulates. The reason I chose this was this perfectly encapsulates that cult era. It's like one of those silly little jokes that 10 people will laugh about for the remaining 3 months.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, you want to tell us what that was about for people who were not
I
there?
think it was just some sort of random person who exceedingly politely, I think it was some kind of entomologist who kind of got annoyed with how ants were being portrayed. And it was just one of those things where, of course, we live in this sort of social media era where people outrage over the most ridiculous things. And more importantly, I think they outrage with a lot of bad faith, right? I mean, is it that the presumption is that you're coming from a wrong place. Your presumption is that you're coming from a place of bias. And therefore, automatic posturing is that, right? But this seemed different. This was just like this entomologist who was just deeply obsessed with ants. And he really didn't like ants being portrayed in a certain way. And it kind of, I think in equal parts, he was looking to educate us. As much as he wasn't, it wasn't in a bad faith sort of this thing at all, which I think is something that kind of characterized that phase of social media. But I guess in the sense that every country, depending on its internet maturity, went through that initial enthusiast phase. And then it kind of became political, and it became, a lot of these other things later.
Yeah, I remember also you had written one post back in the day saying outraging was India's national sport or something of that sort. And it just seems to me that, take me back to that era when we used to outrage about ants eating currency notes, when that was the controversy du jour. As it were, but that just brought back an absolute flood of memories. That entire era. Ashok, just I want to get into the fact that you have. So for those who don't know, obviously, and I've set the context before this, that you're somebody who's done so many projects. You've dabbled in music, a little bit of art, and now, of course, have. If you'd asked the 2013 me, then in 2020, Krish Ashok is going to have a book out. What will it be on? Cooking would not have been on the top of my mind. So that's obviously there. And on top of this, you have what I assume is a pretty demanding job as well, which is unlike so many of the other people who do content creation, for instance. One of your, so I want to start with a comment that you made. I don't know if you remember this or it was just offhand, but for a while I proudly displayed it on my Facebook profile under the quotes section, which I don't know if it's there anymore. It's a quote that you made during a TED talk that you made, the TEDx talk that you made on Hobbies, which is, I work very hard for my free time. I'd just like you to talk about that a little bit, what you meant by that. And, I obviously know what you mean by that, but, how do you make that happen?
No, I think it's so leisure time, if you will, or I'd rather sort of, I kind of divide my time into two kinds of things. One, time when I'm actually consuming some entertainment, passively in some sense. It could be a video game, it could be a movie, or say a TV series or something like that. Versus time that I spent actually creating something, right? Be it writing, be it a Photoshop meme, be it music, be it a mix of everything, cooking, video, and so on. And both of these, in some sense, actually require you to take leisure time seriously. Taking it seriously essentially means that you take your work seriously enough so that you do it so efficiently that you're able to then carve out a lot of this, right? So when I was younger, it's about individual productivity, either as a developer, as an engineer, as a software guy, a lot more automation, really, do things fast so that, if I can finish my work in 6 hours, then, I get a lot more free time and so on. And as you grow older into your job, it's really about, delegation and hiring the right kind of people so that, you can then ask them to do those sorts of things and set the broad direction so that you have a lot more free time and space to really do these other things, if you will, right? So I think the quote was essentially intended to mean that you have to take this seriously. You have to take your ability to use your time to do things that you want to do rather than need to do, right? That distinction is important, right? Your work is something that you need to do, right? I mean, it's your livelihood, it pays the bills, important for your family, important for your kids' future, and many of those things. So that's a need to do thing, right? Sometimes the need to do and want to do align. That's great. Not always possible. But you definitely need to have a want to do segment of your of your time, and that's really what I call free time, and that's what you have to work hard towards earning. And I think you'll as a young person, I think we all don't value time as much as we start suddenly valuing it as you grow older. It's not just the natural sort of as you grow older, impending mortality, and you kind of value time more. But just life experiences kind of tell you that that hey, you know what? I think time's quite precious, and that you can create a lot of joy with the time that you have. Right? Be it for yourself, it could be for others. So it doesn't really matter. So that's what
I wish somebody had really told me that back when I was starting out engineering college or something. I look back at that time very fondly, but I also think that there's a lot of time where I wouldn't say it was unproductive as such. I just think I ended up wasting a lot more time and listening to the same things over and over again, rather than kind of exploring something new. I want to latch on to something that you said, which was about consuming, and this actually. Is a callback to the episode that you did with Amit Verma. And for those who haven't heard that marathon episode, Amit Verma's The Seen and the Unseen featured Ashok as a guest in, I think, episode 201 or 202, around those, where you speak about consuming content, and you speak about consuming content between 2x, 3x on YouTube, etc. So the question that I have is, while I completely appreciate that, and I obviously do that as well with respect to podcasts and audiobooks, etc. Do you draw a line when it comes to, say, enjoying something? Like I possibly wouldn't want to consume music, for example, at one point. Anything less or more than 1x, right? So do you draw a distinction between how you consume content that just needs to be assimilated versus enjoying?
Absolutely. So definitely music, movies, and are things that I don't watch at 2x, 3x, and all that, because clearly the creator has essentially very specifically put that out. And I think the pacing is an important part of that. And with music, it's quite obvious, because it just music just sounds different if you try to speed it up, right? I mean, same thing with the film, same thing with a great work of art, right? In that sense, where I draw often the line is that if I'm watching content for learning and not for merely just sort of, yes, you can argue that you can learn from anything, but if I'm watching a documentary, I sometimes do break the rule and say, you know what? I think as much as the documentary filmmaker has put a tremendous amount of art into it, my reason for watching it is just to learn what he's trying to say, and not necessarily appreciate the craft of how it's being made, right? Yeah. And so, whereas I wouldn't do that, say, for a Star Wars film or a Lord of the Rings film and so on, because I think I'm not looking to learn as much as I'm just looking to enjoy the pacing, the visuals, the interplay of music and sound and everything else. And so I think that's where I draw the line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I still feel like there's part of me that still feels like even the stuff that I listened to at 1.5x, I just wish I had enough time to actually listen to it at 1x, possibly because you could end up assimilating more. But I suppose I love the story that you said about somebody who was visually impaired, who was able to assimilate something at 6x, which I think was an astonishing story. I don't want to repeat that over here. I just encourage people to actually go and listen to that episode, which I think it was quite a lovely episode. And there's a lot that you speak about productivity, etc. over there itself. Just moving on from that entire Twitter phase that we were talking about a while back. Just one of the things that I wanted to say, and I just love your reaction on this, is when we slot the so-called legends, and forgive me for putting you as part of one of those legends groups, as it were. You had some people who were more whimsy, some people who were more out and out pun oriented, some people who were just great at quick reactions. When I was thinking of how I would sort of place you, the word that came to mind was polished. There was always a certain sense of what do you say? There's a certain sense of polish when a post from you comes out, or even a meme for that matter comes out. And I think I remember this when you said Photoshop memes. most people would say MS Paint memes, but I think there's something over there. Is that something you consciously look to? Is there like even like a certain level of, okay, this QC must be done before it goes out? Is this something you consciously thought about?
Actually, it wasn't conscious. I think it was really more of an unconscious, and in some sense, it's actually just more of a reflection of me working through my limitations as opposed to right. So, in the sense that so it's pretty early in the day. I think part of being out there on the internet and putting out stuff and blogging for a while and doing if you will multi-format kind of creativity, right? You kind of figure out pretty quickly that the internet is slightly different from, say, sitting for, say, 3 years and you're painting, say, the Mona Lisa or a Van Gogh painting and so on, in the sense that it's art that is it is condensed from a time and delivery standpoint, in the sense that it's not it has to be just good enough from the core artistic craft standpoint, just good enough so that you can put it out quickly enough, but there has to be a novelty that kind of sort of that makes people remember it. That's what becomes a meme and so on, right? So that it is memorable, right? So in the sense that I think internet art in a sense is different in that there is a certain element of speed to it, but because there is speed, what stands out is not something that looks like it's been done in MS Paint, but it does actually look like a little bit more effort has been put in. And the entire magic is in figuring out what that little bit of extra effort is. And that's really, in the sense that, so I would write a blog post and then realizing that sometimes I would read other readers, Amit Verma being one of them, saying that I would admire just the way he writes, right? And I would say, no, I don't think I can write as well as Amit Verma, but you know what I can do? I can throw in a Photoshop meme that will augment what I'm writing in a way that he can't do this. So I'm going to do that, right? Likewise, and then so that then became music, right? So the whole parody music and paradise noise and all the rest of those kinds of things. Again, it's not like studio quality produced things that could be mainstream, but it's better than the amateur sounding stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And so in the sense that it's really about figuring out just what's the right amount of professionalism that you need to add to some piece of art that you create that just takes it over this is not bad, right? So sort of,
Yeah. So if I may, and this I think is an analogy that you might appreciate, can I consider you FLAC? And you don't need to take the effort to be a vinyl, which very few people might appreciate. But at the same time, you're definitely not a 128 kbps MP3. So is that slotting comfortable? Are you?
Yeah. I mean, as someone who's largely not really paid attention to. In the sense that yes, I can make out that something is less than 128 kbps from a quality standpoint. But I guess that's okay. Good, you think of BS FLAC, which I've always found that to be probably way too much quality than we actually need. But yeah.
All right, that's fair enough. One of the things I'm also struck by is just the amount of depth that you have for each of the topics that you talk about. Now, this might just be a perception on my part. It's not like I've gone out and surveyed others before this, but no matter which conversation or which angle I seem to start something with, you seem to have an immense knowledge of whatever that topic was. When I was looking through emails, I remember you telling me something about Opeth, for instance, and this is a band that I had at that time just got into. And it just strikes me as to how you have not just breadth but also depth into each of these. So I don't have a question over there. It's more a comment, really. So I just want to ask whether you'd like to say something on that, because you seem to be somebody who we could talk to about heavy metal, about Carnatic, about digital transformation, about a whole bunch of things, really, and with a fair amount of depth and not surface level knowledge that, say, a person who spent 7 years in advertising might come across.
Clearly, I think, I guess in each one of the areas that I'm personally interested in, and there's tons that I'm not. And so therefore the depth is restricted to the areas where I'm genuinely interested in. I think I do tend to sort of approach learning or approach, improving in that area in a slightly sort of a different manner, if you will, right? I'm almost always looking at a specific area through as many different lenses as possible, be it books, be it before I would end up doing a whole ton of research on exactly what kind of sound I want for a specific parody. Sort of listen to a ton of music in that process, read a lot in that process, and also sort of learn about a space not just from the non-fiction side of things, but also from the fiction side of things. I would actually argue that a lot of the ways in which, say, I might think about transformation or politics or anything else might come from as much from mythology and fantasy, or Song of Ice and Fire or Lord of the Rings, as it might from like your Plato or Aristotle or Chanakya or something like that, right? So this whole diversity of how I like to read and understand something is perhaps something that is sort of gives me the ability to really go deep when people don't expect that level of depth and so on.
Yeah.
And I think, but I do this not for everything. It's just only in a few areas that I'm genuinely very, very interested in.
Yeah, it actually leads me very nicely into something that I wanted to chat with you about. It's a few questions down the line, but I just want to, but I think it makes sense talking about it over here. I've noticed you're very good at what I like to call intersections, which is taking, I'm not just talking about the fusion part of things, but if you were to tell me in 2013 that you would be writing a book on food, then I'd be like, that sounds strange. But then if it was about blending science and the kitchen, then I was okay, that sounds like something he would do. Talk to me a little bit about that. Like, how do you find these intersections? How do you and it throws up such a rich space, right? Like mythology and heavy metal, for instance, I think is something that you might actually do an interesting job of, and it also just opens up opportunity. I mean, for anyone listening to get inspired by taking two different spaces that have never come together at all. There's a lot of content out there to possibly be created or be researched on. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So obviously fusion is something that again kind of goes back to my original school time sort of era of not wanting to conform, if you will, to certain very specific definitions of art, right? And obviously being forced into Carnatic music is essentially the most natural way to detest an art form and its establishment and everything that it stands for. And so obviously I think, it started out naturally by essentially, this need to argue with my teachers and my parents and everyone else that, look, there's a wider world of music out there. This is not the end all of, everything and so on. And in that, in a sense, also over time, I guess I figured out that, look, if I was writing, I could try to emulate who I would consider to be great writers, or I could mix writing and something else in a way that nobody else has done it. So there's actually nobody to compare me to. And so in a sense, so that was always, so that's why, by style of writing, it's the kind of thing that would have worked well only in that blogging era, not something that a magazine guy would have published. Because you would have said, no, this is very odd. I mean, it doesn't conform to any known styles of writing and so on, right? Likewise, the same thing with music or the different musical projects that I did. Include not just the parody stuff, but even the Sanskrit rock stuff, where I literally put my high school Sanskrit knowledge to actually sit and translate some of these classic rock songs. And some of them turned out to be really hard to translate. So actually, I had to reach out to experts who knew better Sanskrit than me to help me translate some of these things, and so on. Right. So I think, there is, so I guess that intersectionality also comes with its own novelty, in the sense that it becomes something that, you get to, at least experiment for a while without it being judged or compared against something else. And so I think, so that's the same thing. Even when it came to the book, right, it was essentially after a careful consideration that, well, you know what, nobody has written a book that explains the simple science of Indian cooking, despite the richness of the culinary traditions of this part of the world. It's amazing. And the number of IIT engineers and all these other guys we produce, nobody seems to have written about the basic science in a way that can appeal to a non-science, person, right? And so, in a sense that, I almost always gravitated towards that intersection where it looks like an opportunity to actually do something new and original.
Yeah, that's fascinating, man. So when I just want to stick with this intersections for a bit. So it's obviously intersection of two things, right? So would you recommend for somebody who possibly wants to try out something like this, that they start off with a space that you're very strong in, and then add in a layer that they're curious about but maybe not very good at, or take two things that you're 50-50 good at, or just two completely virgin spaces, or does it really not matter at all?
I think it would depend on the individual, but as a general rule, I would think that you have to have one dominant skill, as something that you're genuinely comfortable, and you are above average at. Right? I mean, you have to be honest about that assessment. Take that feedback from everyone, because and you can kind of see this in music, right? You can spot a shallow fusion when
Absolutely.
you hear it,
yeah,
because it's neither this nor that, and it's clearly just it's not there at all, right? So in that sense, I think it's always better to be good in a way at something, and then you pick up an adjacent skill that can add novelty as opposed to and add value if you, right. So I think so that's what I recommend.
Yeah. So that the end thing will be at least above average and not completely sucked from both directions. So you can you maximum end up offending one set of people, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. Let's talk about hobbies a little bit. I know this is a passion point of yours. It's your quite excellent TEDx talk, I must say, was completely based on that. And it's something that had me thinking for a while as well, especially as I had just got out of my B school at that point of time and started developing a lot of not hobbies as such, but almost forced me to sharpen my own the way I approach what comes after 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. So I've always been curious, like, how did this love for hobbies really evolve in, I assume, what was a young Krish Ashok? And I'm guessing a lot of people who want to. And the second part of this question really was: there are a lot of people who might have lost touch with their hobbies, or they might have. The very typical situation is, I work for whatever, say till 6, 7, 8, whatever it is. I don't have time for hobbies, or I don't know what to get started with. What advice would you have for somebody like that who's maybe 25, 30, 35, wants a hobby but doesn't know how to get started with something?
So I think, sometimes in retrospect, a lot of this post facto analysis will sound a lot more smarter than it actually is. But in reality, a lot of this is really just, quite chaotic, and you kind of, figure it out along the way. But I was fortunate to have sort of spoken to someone in my 20s, actually at work, who kind of provided a very nice framework for thinking about self-improvement. And therefore, in that context, where hobbies, fit in, and so on. And he basically sort of took, Mahabharata as a template to really explain that. And he says that, there's a reason why there are, 5 Pandavas and not like 7 or 9, and so on. And he says that each of these 5 Pandavas have a very specific character profile, right? And these character profiles are unique. 4 of them are very unique. And then there is Arjuna, who's a little bit of everything. So there's a reason for that, right? And it's also Arjuna is the third one, the middle one, right? So there's a reason for that. So the other 2 guys are extremes in many senses, and Arjuna is the person you need to sort of focus on, right? And he basically says that a typical management thing, you do a 2x2 this thing of saying that 2x2 matrix of saying, what do people think of you versus that's one axis. They think positively of you, and they are against you, right? So there is that. And then the other axis is that what do you think of yourself? What is your estimation of yourself, right? Is it, are you amazing? Are you great? Are you, you have a very low self-esteem and so on, right? And he says that if you kind of put this, so you have Yudhishthira in the quadrant where he says that I'm amazing and society thinks amazing. I'm amazing. I'm Dharmaraja. I'm this, I complete clarity in my mind, He's obviously a completely fake and utterly terrible character because of the fact that he's like, completely comfortable with everything. Okay?
Right.
And he ends up making some terrible choices as a result of that side of, kind of arrogance. Right. So there's Yudhishthira. Then you have Bhima, who's basically that he believes he's always angry because he believes everyone is out to get him. right? So he's the kind of guy who says that I know I'm good, but society thinks I'm not good, right? So he's the angry young man, the rebel without a cause, if you will, right? And then he says, but the lesser appreciated ones are the other two guys, right? So Nakula is forever the student, right? So he's basically the guy who says that people don't think much of me, but I have to constantly learn. So he's always learning, right? So he's forever the student, right? And then Sahadeva is actually the complete ascetic, if you will, right? So he has a low opinion of society, and society has a low opinion of him. And he's basically the guy he's always in his head, right? So he's always introspecting, right? So the point here is that these extremes, in a way, kind of capture the different kinds of frames of mind that you're likely to be in different phases of your life, right? They're not meant to be. And Arjuna is right in the center because he can be any one of these things when he needs to. If he needs to learn, he learns. If he needs to completely introspect, shut the world outside, he can do that. If he needs to be angry and rebel against the world, he can do that. If he needs to be righteous and happy and comfortable with the world, he can do that, right? So essentially, the larger idea here was this kind of realization that you need to have a way of, in a sense, being comfortable in your own skin, one, around people in a collaborative sense, right? Could be close family, could be your loved ones and so on. So there are things that you absolutely enjoy doing with people, right? And often the ignored part of the fact is that you've got to have things that you can do without people. And that's that Sahadeva mode is essentially the bit that I think that people sometimes miss. And that's essentially the hobby quadrant, if you will, right? It's so in the sense that I don't think playing frisbee with friends or playing cricket with friends, that's not a hobby in the way I see it. Sure. Hobby is something that you absolutely enjoy doing when there's literally no one else around you. Right? Yeah. And so you're just with your own mind and so on. Yes, you could argue that there is a certain element of the social network once you share what you do on social media, etc. But it's not the same. I mean, that audience is still far away in a sense. It's not the same as family or a close one and so on. And I think it's ultimately the sort of realization that hobbies need to sort of fit that gap in your mind. And people who don't have that, right, have this huge gap, and they end up with all kinds of other problems. They end up with, if they get very depressed if they're not around their friends, or if they're not able to go party, if they're not able to, and so on. So you can't always be around people. And again, and you suffer life losses. You lose a loved one, you lose parents, and so on. Much harder for you to deal with it if you have no frame of mind where you can just be by yourself, right? And just with yourself, right? And I think it's something that I read in J. Krishnamurti writings a long while back, and in fact, so influenced that my son now studies in a J. Krishnamurti school, and he used to say this, right, saying that the most amount of learning in a child happens when the child is bored beyond belief, with absolutely nothing to do and with no friends to play. He said that's when a tremendous amount of brain development happens, because you then figure out what to do inside your head, right? And I think that's really where a lot of the art and a lot of the hobbies and a lot of the rest of that stuff comes.
There's a lot more to talk about with Krish Ashok, and we will do that right after this little break.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, in the first half, Ashwin is joined by Varun to wrap India's ODI tour of Sri Lanka. In the second half, DJ joins the party to discuss the first T20 international between India and Sri Lanka. If you'd like to hear more about this match, former Indian cricketer Sabha Karim joins Rajiv Mishra on Khel Niti, and they talk some more about it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're really excited to announce a show about crypto with Rohan Joshi. He's going to dive deep and demystify all this crypto stuff that we've been hearing about. And let me tell you a little bit more about stuff that's going on the network really quickly. Congratulations to Maru Kinayat, who celebrates 50 episodes of The Note with a discussion on health as a fundamental right. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam talks to Harsha Chetanwala of mywealthgrow.com. Zarina Poonawalla is starting a new miniseries on emotional intelligence. Do check out the kickoff episode on the Empowering series. And Simplified talks about semiconductors. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show, or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. That's really helpful for us. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors on the network this week. They make this all possible. Thank you very much. Ciet, Cred, Global Victoria, Bank of Baroda, Intuit India, Lenovo, and CoinSwitch Kuber. We really appreciate your support.
And now, back to my conversation with Krish Ashok on this episode of Getting Meta. I'm just keen to know, a lot of people, they might look at hobbies as something that eventually has to become a career or has to be monetized. What do you, do you look at it that way? Do you think that's a bad way of at least starting off a hobby?
It depends. I think in the sense that it's obvious that if a hobby can be monetized, it's a tremendously good way to get really good at it really fast, because money is a great motivator in that sense, right? I think it's and the more money there is, and I think it's you're going to get pretty good really fast, and in that sense. But I think that and at the same time there is this tension between the fact that the moment you are actually doing something for money, it becomes a different transaction from doing it simply because you enjoy the creative process of doing that, right? So in a sense that I would say that if you don't enjoy the creative process of what you're doing, but you're still making money, it doesn't count as a hobby. I mean, in that sense, I mean, the money part is optional, right?
Yeah.
It's great. It's great if it happens. The fact that I could blog and then I can churn out some columns for Hindu and Indian Express and DNA that I did over the years, which honestly, as I said, I put very little effort into those columns. Okay, I put a lot more effort into blog posts, which won't be monetized in that sense.
Right.
So in that sense, yeah. So it's I think it's about the process and the creative process and how enjoyable it is to you that matters more than the monetization.
So a lot of people have asked me about how to get started with freelance work and things like that, possibly because I've been freelancing for a while, and right now, of course, that's all I do. So one of the piece of advice I give them, and that advice was just from my life experience, and I'm keen to know what you think about it, is whatever you decide to do with respect to freelancers, make sure that when you start off, it's, unless you're in it for the money, make sure it's not an extension of your day job. In the sense, if your day job is making brand PPTs for a client, then don't do the same thing at night, unless, of course, you are in it for the money, because then it's just going to be the same problems that you have at work are going to carry forward, etc. I'd just like to know, I mean, that's something I've always believed in, but since you brought it up, I'm just keen to know what you think of that line of thinking.
Yeah, I agree. I think in the sense that, not to mention that, this can also regularly get into conflicts of interest if you're doing the same thing as well, right? And so in general, it's better as a freelancer to freelance in a space that ideally that you absolutely enjoy, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, hopefully in an ideal privileged situation, have the opportunity of then therefore picking up projects that are genuinely enjoyable, as opposed to, a complete not fun at all. But hey, you know what? I'm going to do it for the money kind of thing. But yes, I mean, if you can do that, so I would suggest that keep your day job and these things very separate. It's possible that in many situations that the skills that you pick up in either of them end up reinforcing and helping each other. That may happen, right? In a sense that clearly, my cooking book is as much about software engineering and algorithms and so on, which is something that I've been doing for the last 20 years or so. And so in that sense, I think there's an opportunity for you to cross-pollinate a lot of these good habits from both sides.
Yeah, there's definitely a theme happening over here, right? We spoke about intersections a while back and how one circle can reinforce the other, and you're saying the same thing now with respect to kind of like this. I don't know whether it was you who said this on that podcast with Amit, because there's so much to unpack over there itself about the compound interest, or the compounding rather of knowledge and interest, and how the more you add to this, it just helps all the other circles, all the other circles as well. One of the other things I want to ask you, just to end with this little bit about hobbies, is you've always struck me as a person who comes out with very, very interesting metrics. My favorite one of late is what mean time to musical enjoyment. I say this as my wife is just starting to pick up the keyboard. Any metrics that you would say that you can gauge hobbies by? Be it money, be it enjoyment, be it a combination? Because some people do it for one thing, some people do it for the other. Is there anything that you thought of?
So that what you're talking about is the mean time to sonic palatability.
Sonic palatability, sorry, yes.
So which is essentially this idea of if you want to learn an instrument, it's basically a metric that kind of tells you upfront, is this going to be painful, or are you going to get some kind of satisfaction, instant gratification of being able to play something half decent in a reasonable amount of time? And clearly, the French horn or the cello or the violin are all in the 6 to 7 years of real hard work before you even hear, right? Before you like the sound of what you play. Whereas a guitar or a keyboard is much, much simpler in that sense, right? So therefore, it's a choice you make. Sometimes, some people can deliberately say, I'm going to go after the harder one. But yeah, I mean, it's up to you to figure out what you want to do. So the other metric that I kind of, have been really thinking about of late is the create versus consume ratio itself of how you spend your free time. In the sense of, are you? I mean, it's just given it's pandemic, we're all stuck at home. And there's just this tremendous amount of great content, and I don't just mean movies and so on. If you get into the whole video game universe, then it's just a whole different
video games, TikTok, and the music. There's so much.
Exactly. And video games, especially the other thing is that, they give you this illusion that you're also participating and so on. You're not. You're just being guided, by the algorithms and so on. So in a sense that I think the create versus consume also in a sense is something that has also helped me reduce my overall screen time. And also in a sense that helped me make the decision to delete my Facebook and Instagram, all these other things, if you will, and purely just keep Twitter is pretty much the only place, simply that too for, sharing what I do as opposed to, spend hours and hours checking every notification and so on. And obviously LinkedIn for work-related stuff. But so in a sense, this is another thing that I kind of started eternally tracking. And I think the other one is the sort of metric that talks about in whatever project you're doing, how much of it is essentially can you lock yourself in and then create it and come out with it, and what part of it requires collaborative creativity. And collaborative creativity does not necessarily literally mean jamming with people, which you might need to do in the context of, say, music and so on, where you do need to live jam with someone and so on. Collaborative creativity can happen simply by you being inspired by something else someone else has put out, and you kind of build on something as opposed to start from a blank slate, right? And I think there is something to the fact that these kinds of creativity work very differently, right? And I think it's for a lot of people who want to get into hobbies and who want to get into really thinking about creativity, don't ignore collaborative creativity, in the sense that don't ignore the fact that you can take something, remix it, and create something reasonably original, as opposed to, don't be fooled by the hype that blank slate is the greatest form of creativity, right? Even if you think you are starting on a blank slate, you're not. Right, the whole thing about Newton standing on the shoulders of giants and so on is true for everything, right? So you may do it unconsciously, but just do it consciously, right? I mean, it's in a way, it's like software, right? Nobody writes software from scratch nowadays. Nobody does. Nobody starts off with a blank page of code. You're almost always going to take something open source. You're gonna adapt it. You're going to build on it. You're going to assemble. Right. And I think you can actually do that with every bit of creativity.
Oh, well said. And not to mention that the computer and laptop, that it's not like he's going to be building the computer from scratch. I don't know if you remember. This is a bit of a digression, but there was this one guy in the UK, I think, who wanted to see how much a toaster would actually cost if he were to actually make everything by himself. So we could buy a toaster for 15 pounds or something. But then he actually, I need this much amount of copper. He went and he mined copper. He went to those guys who usually ship in tons and say, I need like 200 grams of copper from you. And they're like, okay, we can't do that. You're welcome to come down to our mines. And he went and did that, and he did a whole TED talk about it. So that was fascinating.
There's a similar one where a guy tried to make a burger from scratch.
And
the hardest part of that process was actually salt. Literally had to take buckets and buckets of seawater to then evaporate it and to ultimately get salt. That's the simplest ingredient, and that's the hardest thing to do. Obviously, I think he was making a chicken burger. He said, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to stop short of actually growing the chicken. So he said, fine, I'm going to take a pause there and probably let professionals do it.
Fair enough. I want to just close it on the first metric that you said, or the first. I'm not sure if it's a metric per se, but the create versus consume ratio. So what do you think is the ideal, or is there really an ideal? Does it vary from person to person? I'm guessing for you as well, it might vary. Or
I think it's right. I think it varies by person, and that's one of my often my pet peeves about a lot of generalized theories about productivity and creativity and all of that. In that, we're all very, very different.
Yeah.
And individually, not only are we different, our learning styles are different. Our ways of processing information is different. So for example, as I told Amit in that podcast as well, I have terrible memory, and so my go-to heuristic has always been everything from first principles.
Right.
So I don't want to memorize anything. So I would rather derive everything, right? So that in a sense results in a certain style of learning, certain style of creating content and things like that, right? In a similar sense, everybody is different depending on the situation as well, right? So it's possible there are times where you just want to take a break, right? Let's say you just worked on something for the last 2 or 3 days and you just want to unwind, right? So it shouldn't be religious. No. Every 24 hours, I'm going to do 4 hours of creativity and 4 hours of consuming. I don't think it works that way. As long as you're broadly aware at a week and a month level, that if you're doing a bit of both.
Yeah. Right. So how would you recommend people use the create versus consume ratio? Here's my takeaway from that. I would just track that over a period of time and see what moments or what ratio gives me the most amount of happiness. Right? Is it as simple as
that? Absolutely. Whatever, you can even look at it the other way. Whatever doesn't cause me stress.
Whatever doesn't cause me stress.
That's good enough, right? Gives me happiness, I think, is a very bold goal. Doesn't give me stress, I think, is a good enough goal for most people. And in general, I think, one shouldn't sweat it, right? And it's also really just simple, right? So if you're reading a bunch of articles, right? So if you're subscribed to 200 things that you want to read and 100 newsletters from a ton of these people, write an email to someone. I mean, I'm not even saying write a blog post, right? People have stopped writing long emails and so on, right? So just write an email just to your friends, or actually just write an email to your wife if that's an audience of one, right? It's okay, right? But create nonetheless, right? Likewise, if you're just watching YouTube content, watching cooking videos, etc., so maybe just worthwhile just go cook. Could be if you're watching films and etc., go take your phone and shoot a documentary involving the crows in your holiday. It doesn't matter. I mean, the point is that do what actually gives you that kind of enjoyment.
Yeah, I think it all boils down to that, doesn't it? So I just want to go back onto the projects that you were talking about. So I've seen a bunch of stuff that you have obviously done and probably have missed several as well. What project do you think has given you the most amount of satisfaction from, one, a fame point of view, as in the most number of people got to hear about it, and two, from just pure creative satisfaction and perhaps even a little bit of whimsy point of view?
Yeah, I think it would be hard to pick because I've kind of very consciously not dwelt too much on the analytics in terms of audience and reach and things like that.
And I think that itself is a good piece of advice to keep in mind when it comes to these projects.
Because it then becomes an end by itself. It's a constant dopamine rush, which I think one should regulate, if you will, right? It's the equivalent of like eating a candy every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Getting some validation. Oh, how many RTs, how many likes, how many views, and so on. Right? So I think some of the it's hard to pick. I clearly enjoyed some of the Paradisy Noise projects. Clearly, I think because the creative process was great fun. Especially the ones where we sort of made fun of how Haris Jairaj makes music and so on. I think was quite enjoyable because it involved good copious amounts of alcohol, friends, and then people just randomly saying stuff, and then us actually recording a lot of that beyond just talking, right? So I think that was clearly fun. Clearly, I think the series of cooking videos that I did during the pandemic, I genuinely enjoyed, simply again because I like the constraint of the fact that it had to be under 2 minutes and 20 seconds because Twitter had a limit, and then it offered me an opportunity to really combine a lot of skills, right? One, how you actually shoot and the story of the video itself, and the ability to then compose and record like customized music for every single one of them. So I combined everything in one shot. Was clearly pretty enjoyable, right? So almost I think 25 or 30 videos that I did during that phase was quite enjoyable. And I think I definitely did enjoy the process of writing the book. Clearly, I think this whole exercise of trying to explain everything from first principles. And really, I think the act of figuring out what to leave out was actually more enjoyable than and just the so then the gratuitous show off that, oh, you know what, I understand everything in cooking, right?
Yeah.
Or I understand everything about science and I can make funny jokes about science. I think it was tremendously satisfying, if you will, to tone it all down and say, you know what, I'm going to be to the point, right? Yes, some 10 people may enjoy the pop culture references that I make, but if I want to change how people think about cooking, I have to be more accessible to a wider audience. Cannot just be the guy who understands Madras jokes and the guy who understands the intersection of science fiction and heavy metal. And so that gratuitousness and therefore the ability to actually say, can I write something that is genuinely accessible to a wider audience beyond what I think is my natural audience, if you will. And so, I think I also enjoyed some of the Tumblr, some completely whimsical, random Tumblr memes. I think I just recently logged into Tumblr and I realized that I've created some 40 different Tumblrs over the years. Right?
What is the most random of them? We know Tambrahm Rage, obviously.
Right. So that was obviously the one that was most popular and so on. I think there was a completely random one called bears being stalked by T. Rajendra and so on. Very specific. You would have to kind of know who T. Rajendra is to really understand it. But it was complete fun. And again, it was user submitted ideas and so on.
One of the mails that when I was looking through the set of mails that you sent me, one of them was a request to be a contributor onto Same Guy. If you remember that old meme, which was just two different people who
you kind of
look very much like each other. We never found the same
my
guy.
Favorite, and my favorite one is obviously the Sai Baba and Hulk Hogan. I think was
Sai Baba and Hulk Hogan. Yeah.
Right.
I think after this chat, we're just going to have a good time just going through all that old stuff. Again. Any projects of yours, Ashok, that you think either didn't take off or you're like, this is a space that, or rather, is something that you want to get into, but don't have either we spoke about intersections, you don't have enough knowledge or interest in either. I guess if you didn't have interest, you wouldn't get into it in the first place. But
true. I'm just trying to think. So there's probably, I think there's several things that I would have tried that wouldn't have gone beyond a point, right?
Yeah.
Even those 40 tumblers, I think only about maybe I think 5 or 6 of them kind of are well known. Others were like, one-off things and so on. And I guess maybe I'm just wondering, maybe the reason it's hard for me to do this is that I tend to forget the bits that don't work pretty quickly. And then kind of just move on to the next thing rather than sit and analyze why this didn't work and so on. Because, I'm not too invested in because I put so much time into this, it has to have a certain return. Sort of this thing. Because I did it because I enjoyed the process of producing. Right. And the process of enjoyment stopped the moment I hit publish. All the rest of it is a bonus, right? I mean, it gets attention, it gets RTs, all of that is bonus. So I honestly don't care at all. So my Twitter notifications are always off, right? Even if I post something with like 1,000 RTs, my phone doesn't constantly buzz all the time.
Right.
I might, once in a while go and reply to mentions and all that, but I don't obsessively check who's liked it, who's RT did it.
Yeah, a life lesson that I'm taking away from this is knowing where to compartmentalize your dopamine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I guess it's something that you kind of learn, with age. And sometimes people don't learn with age, as judging by how people who are 20 years older than me seem to be addicted to the dopamine of Facebook and WhatsApp. In a way that is really, really hard to really get them out of. And it is also
how does one disengage though? Because you've got Silicon Valley's greatest minds so-called greatest minds trying to get us. How do you disengage? Do you have a process, or is it just?
There is. I wouldn't claim to have kind of like a perfect process that works for everyone, but I would start first and foremost by, as always, measuring. Take an honest look at your screen time. Your phone will tell you, right? I think the first element of surprise for most people is that if you ask people how much time do they spend on their phones, they will tell you half an hour. Right. The reality is 5 to 6 hours. Right. And once you realize that actually there's a 10x difference between your perception of how much time you're spending versus how much you're actually spending, is a good way to start about thinking about cutting back. Right. And then it's really about doing other simple rituals like turning off notifications. there's no need, right? Other than your spouse or your kid or someone else who needs to reach you, there are ways in which you can make sure that your phone rings only for them and is on silent mode for literally everything else, right? Turn off notifications for all apps. So in a sense that, my ex-boss at TCS, he's the chief technology officer. He famously does not use a mobile phone. He still does not use a mobile phone. And he basically says his philosophy is very simple, saying that, look, my time is my time, right? A cell phone is a device that allows other people to control your time. And that's exactly what it is. It's either algorithms or people, right? In most cases, it's just people, right? So before cell phones were there, you couldn't just call anyone anytime. I mean, there were. I mean, if people were out of their house, a landline phone would just ring. That's it, right? And so on, right? So in the sense that all of a sudden we have normalized this idea that you're reachable in real time,
right?
And that it is absolutely important, and therefore that I can call you. I can leave 5 missed calls to let you know how important your time is to be right now, right? That all of that is actually just terrible behavior, right?
Yeah.
So he basically says that no, I want control over my time, right?
Yeah.
So you want to reach me? Send me an email within 24 hours. I'll reply. Right?
Yeah.
I think that's a good SLA for those situations. Right?
Can't believe you managed to sneak in SLA.
Exactly. Right? He says that most things don't need you to call back instantaneously because we managed without it.
Yeah.
Right?
In fact,
so for example, when I was young and I would go out with my friends, etc., my parents had no way to reach me for the next 8 or 9 hours. That's it. Absolutely. That's just they had to deal with it. Today, it's unimaginable.
Yeah.
Right? So, but it is crazy. You can still imagine it if you think about it.
Yeah. This reminds me of what you said about your boss. Also, just reminds me of a piece I read recently about some engineer or somebody working in an agency or something who decided to turn off all Slack notifications, and surprise, not just did his productivity increase, but none of his colleagues noticed because he was because they normalized that, okay, this guy will not reply synchronously, but when he does reply, he'll make sure that it's a thought through answer, or he'll have the work already done when he replies. I think there is a sort of, I think there's a takeaway over there.
No, I think definitely. I think so. I think it's unfair to expect technology companies and these 20-something engineers to understand the neuroscience of how to have a healthy life and so on. They're all young people. They've not had any life experiences. Yeah, while it's great, I think we hope they hire people who are like philosophers, people who are like ethicists, and so on, to make these good decisions and so on. At the end of the day, you can make this choice by yourself, right? I mean, if there is no all of these devices, you have full control over them.
Yeah.
Right. There is no excuse for you to keep notifications on. There is no excuse for you to have to click through and obsessively keep checking.
Absolutely. And I switching off notifications changed my life when I decided to do it, and the transition was a lot easier than I genuinely ever thought it would be. Ashok, I think I'm pretty much towards the end of what I wanted to ask you. This has been fascinating, and many of the things that I actually wanted to ask you, as predicted, you have subsumed into other questions, like the things about metrics and things like that. I just wanted to end with sort of like an observation, and it's not a question really, and I just would like you to comment on this. 2 things really. One, I think through this conversation also, you are a person who does measurement and creativity in like equal balance, right? It's I just love how your go-to to fix something is first to measure it and then to kind of fix it from there. The second thing is, and this is something I want to thank you for as well, is I think you're one of the most open-minded people that I've ever seen. Open-minded not from a sense of, hey, let's try something new, but open-minded more in the sense of breaking down preconceived notions that you might have and things like that. 2 incidents specifically come to mind. I don't know if you even remember these because these were very often. One of them you will remember because I think you either blogged about it or tweeted about it, which was when you got married. You obviously did not believe in the rituals yourself, but you made it a point to ask the priest to translate or something of that sort. I remember something like that happening. And the second is a moment that that very profoundly impacted me, and I don't think you realized it at the time, and maybe still don't. It was when when you're fresh out of a B school and you think that you're on top of the world and things like that, correcting everybody's grammar on Twitter. You came across and very, very politely said there is absolutely no problem if language evolves. If it means that changing a laughter into LOL means that somebody else can understand that actually a better thing than sticking to and I think that little moment impacted me more than I realized it then. But I just wanted to thank you for that, actually. Just want to, you don't need to necessarily say anything because, but yeah, I just wanted to just end with that, really.
I mean, I think it's the grammar part was actually something that growing up, I obviously, like every other annoying kid, simply because I somehow had the privilege of having access to books and having a reading habit and so on, would keep correcting other people's grammar and so on. And you pretty quickly realize that the fact that you or me are fluent in English is a quirk of history.
Yeah,
it's a quirk of colonialism. It's
an accident of birth as well.
It's a complete accident of birth, and there is literally, if you and me would be completely sort of uncomfortable in a panel of people who are speaking, say, pure Tamil or classical Tamil or Malayalam or whatever it is, you then realize that, hey, you know what? Okay, just because the fact that because I'm strong in a language, that therefore gives me job opportunities, and therefore gives me access to better pay, simply because I'm able to speak in this language, is such a shallow thing. The other realization also is the fact that the reason why English is so popular and not French and not some of these other European languages is also the fact that English has been phenomenally open-minded. The reason English is hard is because it's got partially French grammar, partially German style grammar. It's a Germanic language with French vocabulary, ton of Latin vocabulary, Greek vocabulary, and so on. Whereas the French have, made sure that everything is rigid, everything is correct, and there's a central academy that determines exactly how the language must be spoken. And obviously, nobody, not enough people speak French. But English, on the other hand, I mean, a Scottish person speaking sounds so different from, say, an Australian person speaking, or a Singlish person in Singapore, and so on. And I think, and I think sometimes we, as Indians, we find, say, a small town person speaking broken English with mixed Hindi, mixed local languages, and so on. We find that to be, we kind of look down on that, right? And I find a Yorkshire accent very, very, very cute. Okay? From a pure grammar standpoint, that Yorkshire accent is about as ridiculous as it gets. Okay? It is just that at the end of the day, it's a language, and it's just a means of communication.
It's just a means of it's just a means of communication. Last question then, Ashok. If you were in a position to sort of decide this, two things that you would remove from the education system, and two things that you'd make sure everyone who graduates from school in this country or indeed around the world would imbibe, beyond knowing that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. I think that poor thing always gets a bad rap, right? I think whenever people make fun of school education, is always poor mitochondria that gets.
But there's so if you and again it's that whole, if you go really deep into biology, right? It is, and that's actually a far more fascinating fact that people give credit for. The fact that mitochondria is this powerhouse of the cell is, first and foremost, mitochondria is probably not of the cells that we have. Originally were all single-celled eukaryotes and those kinds of things, which, by the way, captured this other living thing and combined its DNA, and the mitochondria provided some sort of services. So the combined, if you will, right? So in a sense, it's an alien thing inside every one of our cells, in the sense that it's not a regular human cell. In the same sense. So in that sense, I think it does raise some interestingly deep questions about what does it mean to be human, right? And the fact that we have like almost 50%. In many cases, if you have a healthy gut bacteria, 50% of all the cells in your body are not human cells; they're bacterial cells.
Wow!
And so what does it actually mean to be human, and so on?
Feels like a narration of Kurgizast videos, but this is fascinating the way you said that. Yeah, sorry.
Anyway, so as I was saying, I think what I would see, I think my slow realization, and I can kind of having been fortunate enough that I had a learning style and the ability to assimilate and to adjust to academic life in a way that I almost always ended up being in that top 5 or 10%. Such people should not comment on the education system at all, because I think you're the tiny minority of people for whom the system works, or at least you make the system work for you. I think the education system does not serve 80% of the kids in it. I think that growing, I see my son as well, I see others, kids, and so on. You kind of realize that not everybody learns in the same way, and not everybody has great memory. Not everybody simply learns by memorizing facts, and some people learn visually, and more importantly, some people need time. Right? So the fact that it's this regimented, you got to know verbs by class 2, you got to know basic algebra by class 5, and you got to know calculus by class 9 is and everybody somehow has to conform, is, I think, patently ridiculous. And I think if there's I would actually just if the school system is not working for you, I think people should just learn at their own pace, and try and find a school, if you will, that does not care about just these sort of milestones, if you will. So I would really get schools to get rid of anything that involves memorization. And and I would rather have them focus on first principles of everything, and make teaching as visual exercise as possible. I think there's this sort of there's this Edgar Dale's pyramid of learning, right? So if you listen to someone, you retain about 10%. If you read, you retain something. If you watch a video or a demonstration, you retain 30%. It ultimately goes down to, if you teach someone, I think you retain about 90%. I think in a sense, I think that's what if kids have to be told how to learn and enjoy school, you said figure out a way to teach someone else, right?
Teach somebody else.
Younger.
I think that's
someone younger.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Ashok, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for everything said on the show, and of course, thank you just for the work that you do. And you are one, creator, if I may. Now that's the term to use. I keep looking forward to what's going to sort of like come out next. It's to me, it's like the difference between an Iron Maiden album and an Opeth album, if I may. In the sense, with Iron Maiden, you know exactly what you're going to get. It's the same thing again and again, but you kind of like enjoy that. With Opeth, you really don't know what direction they're going to take. And for me, that's the exciting thing. So when there's something like, oh, Ashok has done something new, we don't know whether it's going to be in the realm of Carnatic classical, or whether you've decided to start your own Himalayan trekking agency or something of that sort. So I look forward to seeing what's going to come out from Krish Ashok Creative Labs. Thank you so much for doing this. And
pleasure.
And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Ashok has many, many creative projects. I've linked out to some of them in the show notes. Also linked is his book, Masala Lab, which I recommend to anyone who's curious about food, and not just those who necessarily want to cook. I loved our chat. As you heard, we could have spoken about any topic ranging from heavy metal to digital transformation, and he'd have multiple takes on it from multiple angles, and that to me is the best part of this conversation. Like Ashok's ability to draw inspiration or influence from various other fields has always had a deep impact on me, and I think it's a great way to think of hobbies. And even like if you want to start a creative project, just think about how you can blend intersections. So a few takeaways for me from this episode, like I like to do at the end of each episode, 4 things as always. One is the quote that has stuck with me for a very long period of time, since a decade, which is, I work very hard for my free time. I think I really like that. Second is not exactly a quote, but I enjoyed that bit about how Ashok draws a distinction between consuming content while learning versus appreciating the craft of her enjoyment. And I thought that was a very useful model to follow. Third, he spoke about, he's had this line, don't ignore collaborative creativity. And by collaborative, what he really meant over here was not necessarily jamming with other people, but just building on others' work, be it art or be it programming. And how he spoke about how blank canvases he considers overrated. I think that was a nice way of thinking about it. And finally, compartmentalizing dopamine. I just thought that that phrase was quite nice. So yeah, that's this episode. Do feel free to reach out to us if you listened and enjoyed and found this show, this episode useful. I'm Chuck_Gopal on Twitter. Ashok is at Krish Ashok on Twitter. I'm Chuck of all trades on Instagram. Ashok has wisely chosen, I suppose, not to be on that platform. All right, then see you guys next week. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. We're halfway through this season. As I'd like to call it, and we'd love to know what you hear, what you think about this the show so far. Reach out to me, reach out to the IVM team. We'd love to know what if you found anything useful, if you had takeaways, if you want to hear more. There are a lot more guests coming up, and also season 2 also is going to be planned for later in the year or sometime early next year or so. So looking forward to that. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I will be in your ears again next week. Bye.
We live in an age of disruption, of immense change in every aspect of work, life, and business. But is the old way of doing things truly dead? And are we ever going to stop saying the new normal? Join me, Varun Dugirala, on Advertising is Dead every Tuesday as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, creators, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond to dig a little deeper into how we got here, what we're doing now, and where we're headed. You can catch all the episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
From uncensored and unfiltered chats with the who's who of the entertainment industry, I, Siddharth Kannan, bring you a very hardcore chat show called Candid Kannan. Tune in every Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.